I'm at the home of Barry Lewis, who is this year's Amateur Photographer Magazine 2025 Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. And full disclosure, this isn't going to be a very critical interview. I would say Barry is a friend, he can contest that, a neighbour, and I am a big fan. So thank you for taking time to talk to us, Barry, and congratulations on your awards. For over 50 years of being a productive photographer, so the award goes to someone, you know, who hasn't just done one body of work for 10 years or, you know, been productive for a small amount of time. You have been consistent decade after decade. And I'm kind of keen to understand how you keep motivated and how you keep driven, you know, to produce the photography that you do.
Well, you're asking the $1,000 question. I've got no idea. I think I enjoy it. That's the point. I kind of find actually going out with the camera is like a passport to meeting people, having conversations. And I think, you know, when I started, I was, you know, trying to change the world with photography. I was really, took it very seriously. I was a socialist. And I got kind of caught up with other socialists and we all thought, oh, we're going to change everything. And now I realise it's just nice telling stories about people. After a while, people know when to trust you. I think I am a people photographer. But you say, but I just don't do one thing. If it was cricket, I'd be one of the all-rounders. You know, I wouldn't be a bowler, I wouldn't be a batsman. I get bored with one genre in photography. So for a while, I started getting obsessed with street furniture. You know, and for about 2 years, I called it visual noise. I was just going around taking pictures of objects, and then I started filming for about 5 years. I was a filmmaker.
But when's this? I mean, if we go back to the beginning when you were trying to change the world, a specific story or something you were tackling then, because or we could even start before that, because you were young scientist of the year. I mean, that is your. I mean, even while we've been sat here, you've been taking an interest in how the cameras have been set up and the temperature of the light. So I think it's worth people understanding you are, I think, fundamentally have a scientific mind, and that is your kind of origins.
Yes, yeah, I was a scientist and I was an inventor when I was at school, and we invented this thing called a moisture meter that won the BBC Young Scientist of the Year award. And, you know, suddenly my first sniff of fame, and I thought I met the Queen and all this stuff. And I got to university, and then it was the time, you know, 67, it was the time of revolutions, sit-ins, and I thought this is far more, also, you know, just having a good time, hitting the bars and smoking not cigarettes, but it was a great time, and I think that was the time when we all thought we could change the world. There was this kind of sense of possibilities, and then I went after my first year at university. I went to America for about 3 or 4 months, and I worked on the railroad for a few months, and that paid me to travel around, and that's when I first kind of started getting interested in photography. I actually got my first camera right at the end of my first year. I went to see the film Blow Up, Antonioni, and I was so knocked out by it. I went out the next day and bought a camera, and that's how it all began.
Can you remember what it was? What did you buy?
You're going to love this. It was an Olympus.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm an Olympus. Yeah, that's a good choice at the time.
It was great, and then, you know, I think it got more serious when I got myself a Nikkomat a bit later. Okay. I've got to be honest on this.
So you're studying science at university.
Yeah, I did chemistry, pure chemistry, and I was playing as well. And I like chemistry very much. And I think I probably reached my kind of upper limits with chemistry, degree-wise. And
so was photography always there, do you think, as a hobby?
Yes, it was.
As a kid?
I think, no, not as a kid. From the time I went to university, that's when I started. I think, we had loads of pictures around the house, but I was never interested in doing it. I think it was after blow up. It was one of those Damascene moments where it was the possibilities were fantastic. And
did that go down well with the family, turning your back on chemistry and
I was lucky. They just loved me, really, because I was the first person in the family to go to university. We came from a kind of working class family, and they were really proud of me.
You're a Londoner.
Londoner,
you were born in London in 1948.
In 1948, gosh, those are the days.
Okay, so it sounds quite straightforward to I'm going to become a photographer. But, what's
it wasn't straightforward at all. When I left, again, it was in the 60s. When I left university, I kind of took a job as a, what did I do at first? I worked as a theatre carpenter. And that's when I, started taking more pictures, sets and between when they were rehearsing. And I just got absorbed in it. And I carried on using the university darkroom. And lo and behold, there was another photographer called John Sturrock who did maths and he was using the university. And that's how university darkroom, that's how we met. And eventually we, with other people, started network photographers.
Well, we'll come on to that because I just want to
let's get
across this transition. So you studied at the RCA, didn't you?
Yes, but long before that,
how do we get there?
I stopped teaching, and sorry, I'll repeat. I'll start that again. No, so I worked in the theatre, and I did that for about 6 months, and then I took a job teaching in Hackney, because you only needed a degree. So I did that for a while, and I started working in London in the Oval House, taking photographs of performances and things. And I gradually got more and more caught up. But I took a job then as a teacher, and I went back up to Leicester where I was at university, and I taught for 2 years as I was head of department as chemistry, and I think what happened was I was starting after 2 years, it was getting easy to teach. And I thought, God, I'm going to be doing this same thing for the rest of my life. And when you know the jokes that the students are going to like, I thought now's the time to kind of leave. And I just gave it up. I thought I want to be a photographer. I didn't have any job. And I eventually applied for a job as a technician in an art college in Loughborough. And they refused me, and I saw it re-advertised, and I went along there, and I said, "Hey, I really want to do this." I said, "Why did you not even give me an interview?" And they said, "Because you were halving your salary by going as a technician in an art college, and we couldn't understand it." And I said, "Look, that's my business." I said, "Look, I really want to do this." They gave me the job, and fortunately, the lecturer didn't turn up, so I ended up teaching photography for a year, as well as being a technician and learning, being in an art college and with the students, and it was fantastic. And and during that year, I heard that because I had a degree in chemistry, I could get a grant to go to the Royal College.
Okay.
Because it was like a second degree, doing a master's, and so I thought I'll just apply, and I think I was the only one in the college, this technician, that got a place. It was very few people went to the Royal College then.
But there was, how many were in your...
Only six in my year.
What any notable names? What are they doing now? Or you can just say you're the only one that achieved anything of note.
No, lots of them didn't really want to be photographer. A lot of them came from art school and wanted to be artists. And yeah, there were Bob Carlos Clark was one of the photographers who kind of did soft porn and was very successful, and up to a point until he died. No, there were a few, but it was a kind of the most lucky thing was there was one of the tutors was Bill Brandt, and none of the other students knew anything about him because they hadn't really got to it through photography, and Bill Brandt was my hero. And
before then.
Before then, yeah. Oh, before then, I just thought he was amazing, and I thought I couldn't believe people didn't really want to go and see him. So I used to go and see him every week, go to his home, sit with him, and talk. And I think he was very enthusiastic. He was enthusiastic about my work and about photography. He was excited by photography.
What were you showing him then? That must have been quite daunting.
The stuff I know the stuff that I was never. I was a smart ass really. I was never daunted. I was kind of really. I really felt very strongly that I had a way of seeing, unconsciously I think, and I think the stuff that he got most excited about was I did this whole series on a mortuary with the guys working there with the bodies and all of that, and he said I've never seen anything like this, and he was very, very excited by that. And that went into while I was at college, I did 2 books. Just by chance, I spent a while doing people in wheelchairs and I did a book called Have Wheels Will Travel. And it was all kind of, didn't put that in my pile. It's all done with, typed out. We interviewed people and we stuck it all down, and it was an Open University book. And what was the other one I did? Have Wheels Will Travel. I'm sure I did another book. I did, because I immediately went into projects. Kind of like photograph. I wasn't that interested in single photographs. I was interested in a kind of a photo essay. So I was the only photojournalism really there, and I think that's why they.
Can you imagine? Did you have to do a final degree show?
Yeah, I had a degree show.
What one was that? The mortuary work?
No, I had the pictures from. We travelled around Italy with this disabled group. That was one of the main ones. I didn't have the mortuary stuff in. It came out in this book, but I didn't. I thought it was a bit strong for them.
But you've always. I feel you've always cared as a photographer. You've always been quite ethical, and your access, to tell other people's stories has been quite key and consistent throughout the 5 decades. Where does that come from? Just
I don't know. I think people were very curious that I've been a photographer, that I've been a scientist. They thought, why would a scientist be any good at photography? But I think they're just they're part of the same thing. Being an artist and a scientist, you're trying to kind of solve problems. And I've always got on well with people. I find usually. And I just think that...
it's not what you were saying before we started recording.
No, there's always a few exceptions, but generally, especially, I think because I come from a kind of different place. Being a school teacher really helps. Oh, that's right. I forgot to say, when I stopped being a teacher, that summer, I went off to Jersey, and I was a nightclub photographer for the summer. And that meant you had to go out with your camera every night, and you only made money from the number you sold. Okay. And they were all, there was nothing digital in those days, and everything went up on the St Helier. There's a photo shop, photographic equipment shop, and on the window they had my pictures. There were a few photographers doing it. And the more good pictures you sold, the more money you made. And that's when I learned to get on with people because, it's a rainy night and you go into this pub and and I have to kind of cheer them up. I had to kind of, if you had two couples, you really had to, you could milk two couples. You had the two of them together, the other two, the two men together, the two women together, if it was men and women, and then the group of them, and then the group of them all chatting. So out of 4 people, you probably get about 8 sales, and that's how you met, or even more.
Yeah.
And I got quite good about cheering people up when they come in, damp into a pub.
Didn't you work at Butlins as well? Was that
I
before or after?
did. No, I worked
Butlins
before. In 1966, when I left school, I worked for a summer at Butlins, and I was, trying to get laid and serving food, which is what everybody did at
Easy,
Butlins.
Barry. Well, that's true. That's true.
I was luckier with serving food, I think.
You served a lot of meals.
Served a lot of meals. So I knew, and this was Butlins down in Bognor, so it was a kind of...
But you didn't take photographs?
No.
No. Because you are, I mean, that's the one... I know, I'm jumping ahead, but that's the first time I recognised you as a photographer. It must have been in the mid-'80s when the sequence
early 80s I did it,
on
actually.
Butlins ran in The Observer,
Yeah, The Observer. It was 82.
Yeah.
And I just spent a couple of weeks at Butlins, and what was his name? Ian, the writer. We got on really well, and we even went back because they were starting to kind of recruit. They did a recruitment drive for the Falklands War, and they here we go.
But the thing,
And it was fun, and I knew the place. I knew how it functioned, from working there. Not the same camp, but we chose the first camp that existed that had been a barracks in the war. It was a HMS something, and the Germans claimed they sunk it at one stage, but unfortunately they didn't.
But for me, I mean, I was only like in my early. Maybe 12, I think, when I saw that, 10 or 12. But I still remember it really vividly.
Really?
And even looking back, it kind of taught me that as a photographer, you didn't have to go on an aeroplane to the front line of a foreign war. Because I'm from the seaside, and this sounds quite obvious, but I couldn't understand you could photograph your own community and the things on your doorstep. So that was a pivotal moment in my development as a photographer, that you could just kind of find stories, locally, and build your portfolio of that. So I know we're jumping around, but I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, you're not known for a particular style, Again, it's like black and white, it's colour, it's slide, but it's back to consistency. Right. So, I'll tell you an interesting story about black and white and colour. When I first left the Royal College, my first assignment was I got this award from Vogue magazine to spend a year working on Vogue. My first, and in those... Sorry? La-di-da.
It's just what it was there. No, and I'm not. Peter recognised the fact I had a big stain on my shirt.
I've dressed you for today.
I was the wrong. But Terry Jones, who's the art director, just loved my work, and he said, "Look, it doesn't matter if you're not a fashion photographer." And my first assignment was to spend an evening a night actually, with Andy Warhol, and that was amazing. And I was in those when I left the Royal College, almost everybody was doing black and white. It's quite hard to process colour, and we all thought that black and white was what artists, that's art. Colour was family snaps, weddings, and we were above that. And so when I left the Royal, it was the magazine I worked mainly for. I was on the payroll of Vogue, but I was working for Radio Times. They started giving me assignments to do portraits. I did lots of portraits for them, and halfway through, I realised that they were paying, I think it was, let me remember, £75 per portrait, which was good money.
Same as today.
Possibly. But they had I think they had about 8 million readership because they had the exclusive rights to all the TV stuff, all BBC. And but then I found out they were paying 150 a day colour. I thought, hey, that's a good incentive. And I started shooting, that's when I started shooting colour.
Okay, so that was 76? Are we...
Later with radio, about 78.
Okay.
That's when I started shooting some colour.
So, I mean, you know, how important... You're in pretty good health. You look all right, Barry. But how important...
Pretty good health.
Important is legacy? I mean, were you always aware that you were trying to build, you know, something significant? And now, like, you have you are a lifetime achievement award recipient.
I can go die now.
Does that bring it into focus? Does legacy matter?
I think it does. I think for me, the most important thing I did was join up with 8 other photographers and start Network Photographers. This was in '79. We got together, and we were all working for magazines. There's loads of work. We were just lucky when we left. I think that's got to be
lucky when you
left, going into the workplace. Okay. You know, we left college, and straight away there was work. I was working for bits and pieces for the colour magazines. I never worked for newspapers. I regret that a bit. I would have learnt to write better captions and things, but I never did that. I was quite lucky in they accepted that I was going to do stories, which was what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell stories with pictures. And I think there was a new British I had an exhibition about that time with Martin Parr and a couple of other photographers on new British photography.
Martin Parr?
No, he's doing well, but people don't know about him. I think he should get a little name check. And I did it was my first colour story, which was on, I did the thing on Mexico, and I travelled around the oil fields in Mexico on it was a kind of political thing on destruction of the countryside and things with oil. And Martin had his stuff on, it was all in Derbyshire, the life, you know, his black and white, round Hebden Bridge, yeah. And, you know, he had this trajectory straight up and mine was just carried on down. But during that time, I started meeting other photographers. We were all working for some magazines. There's one magazine called Now Magazine, who we all did work for them, and they were kind of writer Genghis Khan. They weren't doing the stories we were interested in, really. It was, you know, giving us some money. So we thought, let's all get together, pool all our pictures so we can have like a library, that we can get a bit of money from the library and have a kind of say, this is this type of style that we wanted to photograph. And that was in '79, and that and we got, you know, everything was so much cheaper. This is the point. We got an office in Kentish Town for £25 a week, got a load of filing cabinets, and we got a guy from Now Magazine who hated it, Slavin, not Neil Slavin, he was the photographer.
So you got filing cabinets now, and how many slides have you got in your...
Oh, I haven't seen them.
Is it 500,000?
Probably, yeah. So the whole of my attic is lined with boxes. Quite organised. My daughter's a scientist, and she's very, very organised. And she lived here for about kind of 3 months, and for rent she went through all my pictures, putting them into exactly the right. And the other lucky thing was I shot Kodachrome. Mm-hmm. When I shot colour, 99% was Kodachrome. Okay. And I look, you know, when I'm scanning pictures now, the colours are all still there. And
it's held.
It's held. And you look at any other film, the worst is Ektachrome. It's just a blue smudge on the horizon.
But so '79, you and 7 others had this idea of forming a collective. Yeah. I think it was 81 officially Network Photographers launched as an agency.
Was it 81? Oh, really?
It's, you know, that's...
well, maybe... I wouldn't trust those notes.
Otherwise, my citation. I mean, but it grew to... Do you know how many...
Yeah, but at one stage we had about 30, 40 people working there, and we had a turnover of millions and millions, and it was we.
So were you a shareholder back then? I mean, I didn't.
Well, there wasn't. Yes, we were cooperative, really, or partnership, I think we call it. And the number of photographers gradually went up, and I think the high point was mid-90s, but after the mid-90s, there was less assignments.
That's when I became a photographer. I graduated in '95.
And we almost had created a monster because we had this big office and we needed to keep working. So like a few of us, Mike Abrahams and myself, John Sturrock a bit, not so much John. I think Mike and I, and Mike Goldwater, we did a lot of corporate work because we need a percentage of the way it worked is if we earned, £100, £15 would go into network, plus the pictures will go into the library. Mm-hmm. So some stories were good for, the money we made were from the second sales. And we had about 10 agencies in other countries, so we would make dupes of all the stories. They would go off to those countries, and that paid for all of it. And we also had lots of meetings where I think every 2 weeks we'd have people come round and look at we'd show them work we're doing. And what was nice, it was a kind of photography is complicated because it's both competitive and it's collegiate. And I think Network had a very good balance. We in some ways we were rivals for some things, but we actually all got on very well. Because if you're trying to show your work and share it, you don't want to feel they're stealing your stories because that worked very, very well. It worked so well, we started to get sponsors from a beer company, then a vodka company, and the people coming. Obviously, the moment that happened, we had lots of people coming. But we made so many mistakes. Because we.
But I see Network Photographers Agency. Can we call it an agency? Mm-hmm. as definitely shaping the landscape.
Yeah, I think
of that time.
Yeah, I think so.
It seemed unique. I didn't get to be a part of it, but we did share the same building.
Yes, you were downstairs, upstairs, downstairs. You were
at IPG. So it closed in 2005. I'm telling you, Barry.
Did it really? I thought it was 2002.
Okay, I'm going to go 2005.
All right, you go 2005. The last days were really tricky because it was it was the time where Corbis was, through Bill Gates' own money, they were building up their library, and he lost the cost of digitalizing your archive is so time consuming, and so we just got. Our work started to be scanned, and we joined with a software company we didn't really fit that well with. And like our German, this Focus was a big German agency. They did their own kind of. It's not just about having the dupes and having the keywords. It's having something that works and I think Focus really hit the rocks over their system.
So that time, round about 2005, digital is coming in, everything's going online. I mean, you've always adapted. Is that when you went into filmmaking?
Yeah, that's when I started going to film.
Because I remember, as photographers, we all felt we were expected to be videographers, or we had to diversify or die. Did you kind of?
Yeah, it was. I felt at the stage you felt the floor disappearing. Suddenly, the fall of Network was a really quite traumatic.
I wouldn't say a fall. That's harsh.
Well, the end of Network. I think it was it was more than just an office and a business. We actually. And we're still friends. Nearly all of us are really, really good friends still.
That's what they tell you, Barry.
No, and I think that was a tricky time. Luckily, I was getting corporate work, and I had a couple of magazines that I I had a steady flow of work with Condé Nast Traveller. Now, one of the things I think is, you say that we could do stories at home. As a kind of young man in the business, the most exciting stories were to get a phone call. Can you go off to China? Can you go off to... And it was, for me, that was so exciting.
So you mentioned America briefly, and we've talked about Britishness and your documentation and of that, but you've photographed in America pretty regularly. Mardi Gras, your 30-year
I've been doing that because what's happened is I got lots of these day in the life books, day in the life of California, day in the life of Hollywood, day in the life of America, and I was doing quite a lot of work for Life magazine. So we used to go for holidays there, and I would often, whenever I did an assignment in America, I would always give myself another 2 weeks. It's very cheap to rent a car, and I'd just drive. And common language, and people in America. People in America are so trusting. They're so trusting. They've got that president now, but it was fantastic in those days, and I shot a load of stuff, not for magazines, went into libraries, but it was about being on the road and doing my own thing. And that led to me coming up with stories. I wanted to go to America, so I would go to, I think it was The Observer a lot. I did that with LA, and I did the pre-Olympics there, and I did the following Olympics in Atlanta. I kind of contacted them. I said, I think this would be a good idea. And they would say, yeah, go to, we'll pay for you to go there. And so you gradually build up your the places you go. And we went on holiday to Miami Beach, and by chance we got some friends there that were selling off these Art Deco building overlooking the sea. And we got this apartment for, I think it was about £16,000, maybe £18,000. But
you bought it.
And I'd just come straight back from a corporate job where I got £21,000 for 3 weeks' work. And that was a lot of money then, straight in my pocket. And I said, we'll buy it. And we had that for 10 years. And I started doing the Miami Beach essay. All you people are going to hate me for all this. I'm sorry. But it was just
I'm struggling
chance.
To stay here, Barry.
It was just chance. And it was good because I knew Miami. It's in fact Mary Ellen Mark that I was working on Day in the Life of China with said to me, "You'll love Miami Beach. Just go there." And that's how we went, and where we met other photographers. And 10 years we had that place.
So you've got a book, Miami Beach, with Hoxton Mini Press.
Yep.
Is that and is that just bodybuilders, or is that,
no, not at all.
The whole life I think spectrum.
And again, it was one of the first times where I thought, slow down. I started using a Rolly. Most of them were shot with a Rolleiflex or a medium format camera and portraits. But then, of course...
Why black and white as well? Because I see Miami
I know. Well, I was shooting... I did shoot a lot of Miami in colour for magazines, but I wanted to differentiate. And in the book, there's probably about a quarter of it is black... converted from colour.
Okay.
I decided to keep, because my body of work was black and white for that, but I needed a bit, I did a lot of kind of clubbing and things, and that was originally in colour, and I converted.
So is that take away the problem of colour, desaturate the image?
Oh, that's what you did. Boom. Very easy. And you can change your skies, you see. You can just kind of...
So do you as a photographer have to mentally shift from photographing in Britain to America? Do you find yourself deliberately adjusting how you approach people, how you...
No, I think wherever I am, I think when you're photographing in... my language skills, though I lived in France a long time, my French is terrible. And I did the book on Cuba I was kind of 3 months in Cuba. My Spanish is terrible. You rely on good translators. When you're like in Romania, and I didn't actually mention my Albania. I think probably the best work I've ever done is the work on Albania. And I've done a few little books, but that's probably
Was that
Again,
an assignment, or was that self-funded? Did you sell a property to go and shoot it?
No. Each of them, I think the Observer, so that was black and white the first time I went, under the Hodja regime. And then when I went the second time, I put it up as, no, it was an assignment. I had the idea, went to the Sunday Times, they backed it. They never ran it because they went over to suddenly being like Vanity Fair. And they said, oh, sell it to the Observer. Then it was run in the Observer. But in the old days, you had to decide. I went to do a story on the Spanish village with Norman Lewis was the writer. Mm-hmm. And I decided, and we were doing the last of the old Europe, I thought, I want to do this in black and white. It lends that. So at those days, you couldn't decide later. You had to grab a load of film, black and white or colour, and do it in that. So I probably did too many foreign assignments rather than, I neglected. I did stuff at home and I was always taking pictures. That's the other thing, I was always taking pictures, which I find I'm less always taking pictures now. I go out with my camera to take pictures or I'm not taking pictures. I think before I was always like a Tourette's with a camera.
Yeah. And what would be your sort of most memorable assignments? Because I'm thinking of the Russian Gulags or the Romanian. The
Romania
polluted
stuff was the most powerful because it was not just a quickie. I went there for the Sunday Times first under Ceausescu, and we all pretended we were. I went. The writer was a spy, MI6. I knew that from the previous story we'd been on. We did Spitsbergen, and I won't say his name. And the money we spent on Spitsbergen, it's so expensive up there. We had a trawler to go around the island. I thought, where's it? Sunday Times hasn't got this much money, and I gradually worked out what was going on. So when we went to Romania. He was a classic carry-on spying. He wasn't that good a spy. He said, we'll all meet in Belgrade. We'll all go to the... So he found a translator. He'd never met her, but she'd just graduated at SOAS. And he said, she speaks perfect Romanian. And we can all meet at Belgrade Airport because we'll get in an old black Mercedes and we'll take it to the bottom of Romania. This was the time when Romania...
So what's the story? What are you going there to document? Is this the...
Well, the story we were doing was Ceausescu's son was pulling down the villages in Transylvania and they were building blocks of flats. But anything we could get would be good because there was very little had come out of Romania. And although he didn't... It's a weird place. You didn't actually need a visa for Romania, but there were so many secret police. Was it Securitate? I think they're called, and they had tabs on everybody. So our spy said, "Okay, we'll all meet up. We'll have this old Mercedes, and they'll think it's a taxi, and we'll be able to be invisible." So first of all, the translator was like. Hello, Dolly. She had big hats, absolutely beautiful, but totally crazy, batshit crazy. And then the cars brought up from the car park, and it was a brand new stretched Mercedes limo, nice. Trying to be anonymous. And I think and then what we did is we pretended he was the chauffeur, and myself and the translator, we were a kind of a couple going to see the place and getting out. And we just got away with it. I got arrested in Kopshemika, in fact, because they thought, why would any tourist be photographing this?
And when you won the Oscar Barnack Award,
yeah. Well, I went back.
After?
Yeah, it was after. As soon as
1992, I think.
1991, that was. Sorry.
But you won the award in 92.
Oh, 91, I think. I think it was 91, but I may be wrong. I'm older than you.
Damn you, Internet.
I got when Ceausescu was just after Ceausescu was shot, I got a call from, I was starting doing work for Life magazine, and I had a very good relationship. And they said, go to Eastern Europe, go wherever you like. You've got a month, you can do whatever you like. What an assignment.
What a dream.
Dream assignment. And I said, I want to go back to Romania. I think it's a good story. I think there's loads
You could have gone Japan, the Bahamas. You chose Romania in the.
Oh no, they said
90s.
not anywhere in the world,
okay.
Anywhere in Eastern Europe, because it was all hitting off in Eastern Europe. And I said definitely Romania. I think there's so many interesting. I wanted to go straight to Kopshimika, but I had to spend a week or so. There was still fighting going on, so I was photographing some of that, and then. This is classic. When you're working with a writer you don't know, again, I'll not mention his names, but he
can't still be a spy.
No, he wasn't a spy. This writer. This writer did loads of stuff for Life magazine, and he was a pain in the butt. He didn't want to leave the hotel in Bucharest. He was quite happy. I think he was having an affair with someone there, and he just didn't. He was happy just to kind of go and report on. And I was having to work with him for a month. And I had to go out, and I said, look, we've got to go to... And it was very difficult to travel then. There was no petrol. It was freezing. There was snow everywhere. I said, we've got to get out to Kopshimika. I think this is a good story. And he said, I'm not going. I haven't got any clothes. I had to go and buy him boots and wrap him up. And he came out and he's moaning all the time. And it was fantastic time to arrive because the security people had just run away. They're the people that arrested me 18 months before. And people were in confusion. And during confusion is a great time for photography because I was taken into the main factory that made the black that goes into tyres called lamp black by a kid of 12, 13, 14. He was at school and his assignment was practical science was to work in this bloody factory. And he took me through the back entrance and we got under the wire and there's only about kind of 10 people working there because they didn't know whether they're ever going to get paid. And they hadn't replaced any of the filters in the chimneys, so it's pumping out black, sticky soot.
Yeah.
Call it that. It's an allotrope of carbon called lamp black. And pollution is complicated. Most pollution you can't see. Like in that place, they had tin and lead smelting. You don't see anything from that, bit of steam, but that's the most deadly. But the good thing about it, for the photographer's point of view,
so if you want pollution, you want it to be visually
You want it to be visual.
Impressive.
It's a kind of, certain things work very well. And as I knew the place, and I was also lucky because it'd been snowing. So because you had this contrast of the white snow, the black faces, everybody was black, and and it's sticky. Lamp black is not like soot. It actually sticks to you. So it sticks to the building, sticks to the sheep. The shepherds are in their fields, pure white fields.
Does it stick to you? How do you deal with photographing in a situation like that?
There's so many situations that are difficult. There you always, when it's that cold, one of the things that happens is your shutter slows down. The oil's in your camera. And so you get overexposure because it's not like a digital. You can't look and see how it's going. You've got to listen. And sometimes if you put it on a 60th, it's going at a 30th because the viscosity of the oils slow the shutter down. That was one hard thing. You just keep all your coats round I had an old Swedish military coat that was fur lined, and I learnt to use that in when I was photographing Moscow back very early on, to have that to keep everything warm.
Yeah.
It kept it warm and kept the soot out, as it were.
Do you bracket? You shoot? Yeah.
Sometimes, not usually.
So a month photographing that story. Life magazine published it.
Yeah, they
feature.
ran it over. Really did it as a good story, and in fact, lots of magazines afterwards ran it as a story.
So we're jumping around the world. So we have to mention.
Sorry.
No, your book called Gulag.
Oh,
which
Gulag,
was,
of course. Yes, I shot that in '91 during Glasnost when people wanted to kind of spill the beans about what was going on, and I'd already worked a couple of times previously in different parts of the Soviet Union, and I approached Geo magazine to do the story. And the conceit of it was to travel along the routes the convicts took from the port of Magadan, where they were all taken either by train or by boat all around from Archangel right the way round. So many of them died on the journey, and then they were kind of treated like, well, they were slaves, really. They had to, and they built this road called the Road of Bones, which was a 2,000-kilometre road that went right up into the mining area in the Kolyma Hills and way up into the Arctic. And two things I decided. I wanted to do it in the winter because I wanted it to be grim, to get that feeling. And we went to Moscow first and talked to survivors. And we also talked to the KGB and got permission to go into one of the prisons. Basically, it was a bribe to kind of go into a prison. And all of these elements, I wasn't there long. I was only there about 3 weeks because we traveled along this road, but I stayed in a prison for a few days, 3 days, I think it was. And without all those elements, it made a good story in Geo. But then during the invasion of the Ukraine, I suddenly thought, it's all going to happen again. And I decided to do a book then. I started researching it. And it took me a year, really, because suddenly, you've got to realize in '91, there was no internet, everything, and it was all lies. No one had really been into the Gulag areas. And it was trying to get any information was very difficult. Suddenly, with the internet, you got stories, and then you had to filter which is true. Like Americans would always exaggerate the number of people killed in the gulags, and the Russians the opposite way. So you had to find how many died. It was very hard to pin down because what the Russians the Soviets would do is the moment someone was about to die, they'll give him freedom. So he didn't die in the gulag. And what the Americans do, they would build up the numbers. And I was just very lucky again with the timing because people were ready to talk about it. And I went into the prison. In the prison, I had a prisoner showing me all his kind of scars where he'd been pushed into a fire, and the governor was in the room, and he was just sitting. He didn't know he was in the shop. He was just sitting. He didn't care because they were all kind of corrupt, and they were all, huge amount of money being made for the.
And you're shooting this again on slide, aren't you?
Yeah.
In grim
conditions.
Siberia,
Kodachrome.
cold
By this time,
conditions.
Kodachrome was Kodachrome 200. So I had 200 ASA, which was wonderful for me. I've been using. I remember doing Red Square midnight and it was one of the had an award in the World Press back in very early on, and I was using Kodachrome 64. And it was a 2-second exposure, handheld, all of them with bits of film, 2 seconds. I think there was one picture that worked.
Bitter cold as well.
Work,
so, camera shake adding to it.
Yeah.
But you kind of make light of all the challenges you've been in, technically, and just physically getting there. I mean, but that's...
Oh, yeah, getting the plane to... The plane out to Magadan was kind of We got on the plane early, and there were 2 air hostesses. She said, "Don't touch the food," because then there was no seats. It was wooden seats, and she said, "Come and see." And there was this big vat of with chicken legs sticking out, still with feathers on. And people coming onto the plane brought chickens and stuff, and they pushed them up in the... See, that was the wonderful thing. There was this kind of... It was an adventure.
Yeah.
I think that's what I loved about foreign trips. It was an adventure. Well, you know this. And I think, again, so lucky to get a chance. And because if you're just as a tourist, you see it all. But if you're a photographer, you've got to engage. I think that's the best thing about being a photographer.
But you always came back with the goods, though. You always delivered the story, and that's why you were sent again. You know, and the Gulag book published by Fistful of Books.
Fistful of Books, yeah.
Still some copies left.
Yeah, and it's done really, really well. It was a finalist in the Lucy Photo Book Awards, and it was on exhibition at the Getty Museum.
It was exhibited at Photo North Festival.
Photo North Festival, yeah. No, and it's quite interesting. There wasn't that many pictures. It was quite, it's as many words. I had to do a lot of writing to contextualize the pictures, and I think all photographers should learn to write.
Yeah, and I guess that's another, so that work was shot over 30 years ago, and it's only just being published in a book. Yeah. So
long
history
tail.
Will make what we shoot today more relevant in time. So to understand that as a photographer, I think is quite important.
I think so. I think kind of documenting things that you take for granted. Say fashion. 2 years later, it's all changed. 20 years later, it's like so exotic. 30 years later, it's probably the same again. Yeah. I think it's... So
photograph today what we might be prevented from photographing tomorrow.
Or photograph for the next generation. When I'm dead, those pictures will still have their value if there's a repository.
I hope so, Barry. I've got a couple of...
I remember I was looking at my diary in 89, December 89. I was doing this Blackpool story, Christmas in Blackpool for Geo magazine. And I went off to Romania less than a week later.
And having been to Blackpool, that must have seemed like a benefit going off to Romania. Christmas in Blackpool.
Christmas in Blackpool.
The early 90s.
We had a hotel. It was £200 for 2 weeks, and that included Christmas presents and full board. You can imagine what it's like. My room was so small, I couldn't get into the bed without limbo dancing under the sink in the room, and it was. Why
would a German magazine be interested in Blackpool?
Well, the English they'd seen my Butlin stuff, and they liked the idea of tatty English holidays.
Maybe this is a good point, because I think you've consistently photographed the British throughout.
Yes, I have.
So and how is that? Was that something deliberate, or was that kind of incidental?
It wasn't deliberate. It was incidental. It was just, I like the seaside. I came from East London, and the seaside was glamorous to me. And in fact, Blackpool was quite glamorous in the early 80s. It was kind of, it wasn't glamorous, but it was very much alive.
I would say, when people say who are the British photographers who have shaped, and captured the history of Britain. And for me, you are in there, and you can see that from all your Café Royale books, another edition of British life and things. But you wouldn't necessarily say that's part of your legacy.
Well, I'm finding it is, since I've just done these three books being British, which because my wife's very ill, so I'm taking a year off from photography, and I'm just going through my archive. And it's the first time I've found pictures I didn't, I was so busy, I often would quickly go through. And for a magazine, you're looking for the double-page spread, the cover, and it's all about melodrama. Mm-hmm. Whereas often the most interesting pictures are kind of more subtle and hidden. And I wasn't subtle or hidden when I was younger. But looking back, there's some great pictures that were missing, and especially when you do a book, it's like you're writing a piece of music. It's got to have a rhythm to it, whereas a magazine is. And I think that, for me, actually having this year looking through my early work, and there's tons of it up there. It's one of those things I don't think I'll ever finish. I could really...
Every time I pop round to see you, I go and shove a sheet of your slides under my coat. But you were doing, I mean, just to bring like the viewers up to speed with what you've been shooting recently, because you're exhibiting your intersections work at Photo North Festival in a couple of months, haven't you?
Yeah, so that's an ongoing project. I decided I hadn't done enough on London. Back in '75, I got again, it was fantastic. I got an Arts Council grant to photograph Londoners travelling to work called Coming and Going, and that was at the Museum of London, and then it was in the Royal Festival Hall, all sorts of things. And I wanted to go back to that and do it in a very different way, because things have changed, I've changed. I wanted to do it slowly and talk to people and interview them as well as take the picture. And so I started with a huge 5.4 twin lens reflex amateur photographer. There was only a few of them made. Man from London called Peter Dench, and he went over to LA to work for, I think it was Esquire magazine, and it was all kind of pert nipple shots in those days that he was going to do, and they wanted
nipple shots.
Pert nipple shots.
Okay.
Yeah,
I've not come across that phrase.
Oh well, you've been unlucky. And he had to shoot it on 5.4, and he wanted the kind of decisive nipple moment. And he wanted to have a 5.4 that you could take instant pictures. Mm-hmm. So this is like a big Rolleiflex with a 5.4 body below and a 5.4. So both lenses
I've seen
together.
A picture.
So it's very tall and very difficult to use. It needed a step ladder because you're looking down on the thing. And I started it with this. I thought this will slow me down. And I couldn't believe how expensive it was, costing me £6. And that's me processing the film, £6 per shot. And I thought, this is crazy. And then after about 8 months, I was doing the Queen's funeral, and somebody tripped over the tripod and it smashed, and I haven't been able to get it repaired. And then I got a medium format camera, which is, everything's in focus.
Is this the
Fuji 100, yeah. And it's perfect for it. And my back's much better, I'm 76 and carrying this step ladder, the big camera, the tripod, and such hard work. But you got a crowd, people wanted to be photographed, and it was just, you just would set up on any corner and you'd get people really queuing to be photographed. But I was quite worried. I thought, what's it going to be like going to an ordinary looking camera? Do you think they won't be interested? But it's not about that. It's about my confidence. I knew what I wanted to do. And I don't approach people with a camera. I get my mate who's standing by the camera, which I nearly always do it on a tripod. Tripod's interesting. I think pictures on a tripod are always very, very different to handheld, even if it's a portrait. And I think you think a lot more about how it looks, and I think they're always better. But in London, there's so many places, the moment you put a camera on a tripod, there's going to be some security guy saying, can't do that. Because half of London is private streets. Mm-hmm. So in the end, I've got tennis elbow from using the heavy camera handheld, because you never get stopped if you're using an ordinary camera the moment you have a tripod. And yes,
And what are you learning from the people? From you're building a picture of London.
I'm learning that the picture of London and the multicultural side of it, and the fact that people, the hardest moment is going up to a stranger and saying, "Look, I want to spend 10 minutes with you. It's not going to be a snap. I want you to talk about yourself." And I was thinking I was going to get a lot of turning down, and I think we put huge barriers up ourselves that people, they're not going to want to be photographed. But if you approach them in a kind of a nice way, and I don't approach them with the camera, as I was saying, I actually have about 4 of the pictures which look very, very nice. I say, look, would you be interested in this? I don't, if they don't want to, I don't want to do it. I said, it's going to take 10 minutes of your day, and you've got to kind of talk a little bit about what you think of London and anything you like. And everybody gets given a picture.
Yeah.
Digitally,
so
usually.
A collaboration.
It's a collaboration.
These are
It's a
collaborative
shared.
times.
Yeah, it's a shared thing, and it's also fun because I've made so many close friends. Funny enough, a top conductor by chance in the middle of London, and one of my closest friends now lives just a few streets away, and she's a composer, and they're in the exhibition that's going up to Leeds, and each one needs to have this little story. The hard thing with it is when you have a great story and the picture isn't quite as good, or you have a great picture and the person is maybe they're a bit shy, they haven't got a lot to say.
So it's always got to be driven by a good photograph.
Photograph's got to be the hero for me.
So that's kind of good advice for our viewers then, as to how to, the fear is in the head of the photographer.
Yeah,
most
I
people
think so.
don't mind being photographed.
And it gets better during the day. The first one that you go up to, if you get if the person says no, especially if they say it no grumpily, it's quite hard to get back on the horse. But after you've done a couple, you lose all your inhibitions and you're so into it. And I think that transfers to the person. They know you want to do the best for them. I find it a little bit difficult for kind of homeless people, victim people, and I'm quite reticent. I've only done a few of those because people in too much costume.
People are trying too hard, or do you feel it's not authentic?
They're hiding behind the costume often. If they've really got things sticking out their head, all of that. It's a diversion from the person, from getting into their soul, if you like, seeing the eyes. For me, it's kind of getting the gaze. And I never know who I'm going to... It's like fishing. You're out there and you don't know who you're going to meet. And I've got no idea why I choose certain people.
That sounds nothing like photography, Barry.
It's not. A lot of it isn't about photography. It's about kind of...
And do you... I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel as though you've always been like that through 5 decades. You've always been quite personable and interested. I mean, but photography has obviously changed dramatically throughout each decade you've been working. And so has it been a struggle to adapt? Or, we did talk about the turn to digital, but you seem to have thrived in every sort of segment of change along the way.
I think the hardest time was when I went into film, because I really liked it and I was getting lots of little films to make, but I found that hard work. I couldn't sleep at night when you're with a film. You're thinking about how you're going to put it together. I found it quite stressful because and the other thing was always the films there wasn't a great deal of money. I was mainly working on art-based films for dancers, all sorts of things. I went all over the world doing it, but I was always kind of getting favours from people to help with the editing or doing the sound. I found the sound, it seems much easier with all what they have now, but the sound was the trickiest.
You only notice the sound when it's done badly.
Oh, God, yeah. And as a photographer, your impetus is the visual. So sound is secondary. So in the end, I formed a partnership with a guy who was really good at sound, and he operates you're very good doing 2 cameras, 1 person. I think that's really hard because I would always have this person who was listening to the sound, and whenever I was going off, because I'd be doing the interview from the other camera, and whenever I was going off piste and talking about all the different stories we have, he would whisper in my ear saying, look, you've got,
So was there a moment then when you thought, I'm tired of filmmaking, I am a photographer, I still believe in the power of the still image and telling a story? Yeah,
and it was like such a wonderful return to go back to still photography. It was like a release after I was still taking pictures, but my principal way of earning money was making films. And I realized, and my daughter came, I was living in France for a few years, and my daughter came and stayed with me with her family, and she helped me. I was making this film, and she helped me, and I realized straight away she's the one to become a filmmaker, and she's won a kind of an Australian Oscar. She lives in Australia now, and she runs her own film company, and she's perfect. She's like a Rottweiler. Film is not about the visual. The visual's just part of the whole thing, and it's not the most important. And for me, I just love the visual and I like the interactions, but also I think doing stills, you get better interactions with people than I think with film, because film, people are
technique
more,
gets in the way.
yeah, and they're less trusting. You know, when as a stills photographer, you must have had the same thing. When you go in to interview someone famous, they're a lot more frank with you. When the writer's out the room, they will say, "Oh, thank goodness he's gone," and they'll tell you all these stories because you're just seen as just the photographer. But of course, if you keep those stories and tell the writer afterwards, I always found that people trusted photographers more.
So as a key piece of advice, to keep consistent and the quality you have over 5 years, I mean, for me, it sounds like it's to be interested, in what you're photographing, to tell stories. I mean, what's your take on Barry Lewis staying at the top of his game for 5 decades? How do we do it, Barry? I'm halfway through. Your lifetime achievement is 2.5 pages of A4. I'm about a paragraph in. So how do I get through 2 more pages?
Well, you just got to love doing what you do. It doesn't matter. It's not to do with photography. If you do anything for a long time, you've got to completely, adore looking at pictures, trying things out. I'm an old-fashioned photographer. I look at some of the stuff young photographers are doing, like even this intersections. It goes back to August Sander. It's looking back at a kind of a very simple way of taking people's pictures, and it's all to do with my relationship with the people. Nowadays, a lot of young photographers it's all about showing their emotions in the pictures, and mine are very different. It always comes from a looking at the world through my eyes, but trying to describe the world, whereas obviously a bit of myself comes into it, and I've always got on okay. I think being a teacher helps, especially if you're doing a group shot. Hey, you there, move that way.
Yeah.
Having a megaphone, my only tip would be have a megaphone if you're doing a group shot, rather than trying to shout.
A rolled up piece of paper.
No, proper electric. You can rent them for £5. They're definitely worth it for doing I had to do a whole village once for the Observer, and I had to be up on a high crane. Everybody was there. There was the gay vicar with his lover. There was the cricket team. Everybody, and we were so lucky. The big mistake there. They all went to the pub first, so everybody's a bit pissed. And I'm up on this, a long way away from them. But having the megaphone, I could be the kind of like the Donald Trump of photography. I could say, move that, because you have to be so precise. You set it up, because I had the village behind. And I'd like to kind of find that picture again. It's up there in my archive somewhere.
So it's Barry Lewis, 5 decades, over 20 books, huge legacy. Number 1 go-to piece of advice: get a megaphone.
A good pair of shoes.
And a good pair of shoes. Barry, congratulations again on your Lifetime Achievement Award for Amateur Photographer magazine, and look forward to what comes next.
We know what's coming next in the end, all of us. Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview with Barry Lewis. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, or feel free to comment below.